Today is the feast day of Saint Benedict of Nurcia, or Nurcia, as it became known, the great patron saint of Europe, as he became known in Roman Catholicism. Why the patron saint of Europe? Well, because Europe needs saints. The European Union attempted to construct a history for itself without God, without the cross, and without the saints. And of course, what a futile endeavor. One cannot understand European history without an understanding of Christianity. And central within that is the figure of Saint Benedict. Saint Benedict, who stands as an Orthodox saint, a Roman Catholic saint of the 5th century and 6th century, born in the about 480s in Italy, studied in Rome, and lived in equally chaotic, uncertain, economically downturning times as we do, and uncertain times. And he feels a calling while he's in Rome: flee. And so he does. He gets out of Rome, disgusted by the moral depravity and the chaos of the place. Nothing's really much changed on that scene. And of course, that could be applied to any of our cities today. Flee. And off he goes then. This is a nice little book, looking at the rule of Benedict in a kind of Lexio type way, meditative, reflective way. And this is an equally good book, doing the same. It's the fruit of 3.5 years of evening meetings of a group of Cistercian monks in Canada. I think it's Canada anyway. Reflecting on the rule of Benedict. So basically, he heads for the hills. Let's get it right here. He heads for the hills, and he joins for a time a group of men who were trying devoutly to live the gospel. It's a wee bit like Siddhartha Gautama. I've been teaching about him recently at school. He meets this group of hermit ascetics in the sticks, in the mountains, and helped by the monk Romanus, Benedict then became a hermit for several years in a cave at Subiaco, about 75 kilometers northeast of Rome. Eventually, he was discovered by shepherds who recognized his holiness, and, like so often is the case, a community's built around him. This is totally in line with the Eastern Desert Fathers. The monastic communities and even villages would grow around holy ascetics and their presence in a particular area. Soon Benedict was the center of attention. Visitors came to him for spiritual guidance, and communities of his disciples were established along the steep slopes. To maintain peace, when a local priest became jealous of Benedict, imagine, jealousy within the clergy, jealousy within the church, who would think it? Anyway, he and some of his disciples left Subiaco for the town of Monte Cassino. Within the walls of the ancient fortress on the summit of its mountain, is a beautiful place. A couple of hours outside of Rome, you can get the train. I've climbed up there when you can get a bus, but I had to wait several hours to get the bus, so I just chose to walk. And then because it was a great windy road, I decided to just head vertically up the hill. And I was still a young man, and got pretty full of thistles and thorns, shall we say, by the time I got to the top. But incredible place, really surreal, beautiful, and I hope it's still spiritually very beautiful too, high octane spirituality, but it's certainly aesthetically spectacular. This monastery set on a mountaintop. So anyway, Within the walls of the ancient fortress, on the summit of its mountain, Benedict established a new community. He died at Monte Cassino and was buried there beside his twin sister Scholastica, who had followed him into the monastic life. That was common in medieval times. Saint Bernard has his whole family, including his wife and his kids, follow him into monastic life. Like our own, Benedict's age was an age that witnessed great change, collapse of the Roman Empire, social and economic insecurity, a widening of the gap between rich and poor, turmoil within the church, and controversy about faith issues. And, that's the Lord's answer to these things, and maybe it'll be the Lord's answer to the turmoil of our times. And, reflecting on this day of St. Benedict, his feast day, I think to myself, the rule of Benedict is becoming important to many lay people, both Orthodox and Roman Catholic. I know that many Western Rite Orthodox are following, in one way or the other, the rule of Benedict, and because it's not an overly legalistic rule, if that's not a complete kind of like contradiction in terms, it's not overly legalistic, aiming more at the spirit rather than the blind letter. It can be applied. It can be applied to an oblate, a lay person in the world, as well as a celibate young lad in a monastery, or a hermit even. The Benedictine rule has had such an incredible success in the West, and yet it stands at the interface of East and West, because Benedict is drawing from the early monastic tradition, which is coming from the East. And therefore the rule of Benedict is laden with quotes and indirect and explicit from Basil, from St. Basil and his rules, from the rule of the Master, which preceded Benedict's rule, from Origen, from Cassian, from Pachomius, who's seen as the great founder of the Cenobitic life, the koinonia, the koinos, the community life, as well as, of course, the father of all monks, St. Anthony, and his rule. So all of that is found within Benedict's rule. And this is why the Vatican II writes, this chap acknowledges it, that Roman Catholics should imbibe the great spirituality of the Orthodox East, because in it you find the great development of particularly monastic spirituality that was then to fertilize the spirituality of the West. It was to have such an influence, because there's no religious order today, whether it's the Franciscans, whether it's the Little Brothers of Charles de Foucault, Little Brothers of Jesus, whether it's the Poor Clares, whatever it be, the Jesuits, there is no order, active or what's called contemplative. I know in Orthodoxy they don't have that distinction. In the Roman Catholic tradition they very much do. But they all draw from Benedict's rule to some extent. They all trace their origins back pretty much to St. Benedict. He gives his rule not as like an exhaustive, this is what you have to do in all occasions. I think when you've got a rule that's too exhaustive, I was in an order that was sought to be too exhaustive in all things. It's like a one-size-fits-all. You tend to snap people. You tend to break people. And I think that was the strength of the Benedictine rule, without being an expert in it. But I think that's what it brings to the table, is something that is at the same time idealistic, heading for the heaven, making saints, and it stood the test of time on that front, but also manageable, doable, gentle and humble. Something in it for everyone. And that was not the case in some of the Desert Father rules, and the rules that were coming out, like the rule of the Master. They just didn't stand the test of time. Charles de Foucault, when he goes to the desert, he had been a Cistercian, and he writes a rule, and he wants to have followers, but it's just too strict, too radical, and people simply didn't have the grace, did not have the grace to live like he was living. Benedict has that wisdom, that softness and gentleness to see that it's not one size fits all, but that the principles are what is all important, that we are to seek God above all and in all. Benedict drew on the great tradition, the great emerging tradition of Desert Father spirituality that John Cassian and others had brought back from the deserts of Egypt, back to France, Martin of Tours, etc. He draws on that, but develops it, with a system that has space for the hermit life, but also an appreciation of cenobitic life and the need to mold the individual and adapt the rule to the needs and the grace that's working in each individual. In a time of chaos, maybe Benedict's rule could be very useful to us. His rule went on to provide stability, to provide us centers of community, Christian education, Christian literature, and all of these things. And maybe in our day and age, some kind of resurrection of our great monasteries in the West could help the survival and the thriving of Christianity in the West today. I think so. May they not just become breweries and museum pieces. May that never happen. Through the prayers of Saint Benedict, may his rule and his way of life and his prayers bring us all heavenward. Amen.